blockers to Slavic unity. In May 2024, President Fico of Slovakia was gunned down in what was obviously a CIA assassination attempt. Fico is, thankfully he is still alive, staunchly pro-Russian, and this deeply mattered to NATO and troubled it. And then it suddenly disappeared from the Western media. Indeed, in the EU, Miroslav Radakovsky of the Slovak Patriot Party has only said Slavs should unite, especially due to the mass murder of Slavs recently in Ukraine, and probably his sentiments also encompass ex-Yugoslavia. What are we waiting for? There are blockers. These are the two main countries. The blockers. Both countries have things in common. Both anti-Semitic and significantly Catholic. These are fifth column regimes to the Slavic cause, and they are both linked, but there is hope for them to repent and rejoin the rest of us. Poland is the main conduit for NATO arms shipments to Ukraine to murder Russians. There are several NATO bases in Poland, and USA was so afraid that they installed the Patriot missile system to defend their aggression against Russia, which would be perfectly justified to nuke Poland in self-defense. Imagine North Korea delivering weapons to Mexico to attack California when the shoe is on the other foot. In fact, Poland, despite its anti-Islam refugee rhetoric, is firmly pro-West, so much so that it is beholden and relies on Germanic euros. Remember how Syrians were beaten up at the border crossings in 2011? But they bombed Serbian Slavic brothers in 1999 and provided military support to NATO in the 90s to destroy Yugoslavia. Recall also, during World War II, that Jews were murdered massively by Poles. They did not need German encouragement. We know the first Western test after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was to destroy Yugoslavia, a confederation of like-minded South Slavs. A decade of sanctions, propaganda and war with Poland's collusion. They never once stood shoulder to shoulder with fellow Slavs during that time. The fall of Warsaw Pact countries was a real opportunity to stand united as Europe, but again Poland treacherously played the pro-West card. Germans celebrated as the Berlin Wall fell. But this was bad news for the rest of Europe. Once Warsaw Pact alliances were removed and Yugoslavia was out of the way, NATO planners focused on Russia's weak points. They already tried with Central Asian states and South Caucasus, but this failed. Iran was not possible either. Russia fought in two Chechen wars to eradicate CIA threats to its border, emerging stronger despite occasional terrorist events. Further, Russia helped Syria defeat ISIS, the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, and gained a Mediterranean port in Latakia, despite the US still illegally occupying 20% of the country, stealing its abundant oil. Putin himself wanted to join the NATO pact, but was declined. It became patently obvious that the WWR, or Washington-Westminster regime, goal was to destroy Russia, at least in the short term, before moving on to China. The new intermediate goal for NATO planners was Ukraine in its quest to degrade Russia and with ex-Warsaw Pact countries on board, created by deception, they overthrew the legitimate Ukraine government in 2014, with Newland, the Secretary of State at the time, famously saying, "Fuck Europe," a phrase resounding ominously when we realize Europeans do not run Europe, but a Zionist cabal based in Washington. This paved the way for the Ukro-Nazis like Azov Brigade to launch an attack on the Russian minority, with the target to kill as many as possible. After failed Minsk I and II agreements, which NATO reneged on, which both Hollande and Merkel admitted they lied about, the toll of ethnic Russian Ukrainian dead civilians was 14,000. By the time in 2022 Russia started the SMO, or the Special Military Operation, to defend its own people. Is Ukraine democratic? It banned the Russian Orthodox Church, banned the Russian language, outlawed free press, expelled all ethnic Russians and limited free speech. You decide for yourselves. But what about the Azov Brigade? Nazi Stepan Bandera, Baba Yar massacres of Jews, in case we forget. And what have we seen since? 600,000 Ukrainians dead on the battlefield, tens of thousands alone killed by Ukrainian weaponry, and 50,000 further Russian dead. Millions of Ukrainians fled as refugees, many men evading the draft, not wanting to be involved in certain death in the meat grinder. This Slav-on-Slav destruction has to end. Indeed, the conflict is escalating. UK Prime Minister Boris B.J. Johnson, a failed politician who was fired twice for lying, who ran the UK into the ground, forced Zelensky in 2022 to tear up an agreement with Russia, a chance for early peace. The cock pianist, transvestite, unfunny comedian, Zelensky's allegiance has to be questioned. He has an Israeli passport and $500 million personally in his bank account. He's preparing his escape route, hoping Ukrainian generals do not get to him first. But the genocide in Israel is taking longer than he thought, since Palestinians are fighting for their existence, killing thousands of IOF terrorists. He's competing with genocidal Israel for devalued US dollars. There is no end in sight. The only country he can find safe harbor in is America, and even there he could be assassinated. The WWR bully boys are trying to convince Europe to spend more on weapons, more on defense. Russia is the threat. France, UK, Germany have tens of millions living in poverty, with millions of refugees and a restless, impoverished native population. What about spending money on its own citizens? Do we not need better roads, schools, wages, housing and healthcare? France threatened to send 2,000 French soldiers to attack Russia. Surely echoes of Napoleon. March on, Macron le Merde, marchez. Surely, as we see the Western aim to destroy and economically rape Russia, we should urgently create a Slavic Union to protect ourselves. When Ukraine is rebuilt, it should be done so by Slavic hands, not Zionist US companies like Halliburton or BlackRock. Friendly diplomatic terms with Western currency trader colonialists are welcomed, but we will not be ruled, sanctioned or exploited by them. They will be the future slaves, begging to join the master's table, but they will be blocked. They do not fit. And we should be prepared they will use war. Russia always has the nuclear option to destroy Ukraine and Poland, but it has to assess now Is it better to do this than lose 50,000 more Russians? A hard choice for Putin. In the end, we will see sense, a growing bloc of 300 million plus, with unlimited Russian resources and no suffocating central bank chains, no Western economic slavery, illegal war colonialism, or LGBTQI plus fakery, promoting family and tradition, culture with a mutually understandable language. WWR is afraid of this association, hence the wedge it is placing and the propaganda of hate while pretending to be open, liberal, and democratic. Stop the Gaza genocide. Vucic of Serbia and Orban of Hungary are alike. Orban, the former anti-communist, anti-Zionist nationalist, Vucic half a foot in NATO, half outside, recalling how NATO gleefully fought with Uçaka terrorists and bombed Serbia into the Stone Age. Words of former NATO General Secretary George Robertson. Recall Russia never ever attacked Serbia. Orban is breaking ranks with his recent trip to Russia. He knows Europe is weak without Russia. Further, Hungarians are mainly Pannonian Slavs, according to genetics, ruled over by the small class of Magyar invaders. Follow Robert's advice, but we need to urgently bring on board Ukraine and Poland, make the population see sense, overthrow their liberal democratic anti-people establishment government, else there will be a divided Ukraine with a massive military presence on both sides, and Poland too, for decades. Stop any more Slav-on-Slav killings. So what is the future of Slavdom? Slavs need to unite amongst ourselves and with Russia. Slavs need to ditch the US dollar, the Great Britain pound, and the European Union euro, which are just fiat currencies. Slavs need to remove liberal democracy, Zionism, which is Satanism, and LGBTQI+, be assertively pro-family, pro-tradition, pro-peace, pro-unity, and bring the multi-million diaspora back. In fact, there are tens of millions of Slavs who help with the economies of the countries which have divided us and attacked us. And urgently, Slavs need to join the BRICS movement. Slavs can build a glorious future together.